Morning everyone, and welcome to today's Rostify webinar. Thank you for joining us. I'm Claudia, Marketing Manager at Rostify. We provide volunteer management software that helps organisations streamline recruitment, scheduling and engagement. Our platform is designed to make managing volunteers easier, more efficient and more impactful, so teams can focus on the work that really matters. We are very excited to have Jenny Mann with us today. Jenny brings over 20 years experience in volunteer management with charities including Oxfam, Girl Guiding and Home Start UK. She'll be sharing her ideas on advocating for change inside complex organisations and how to move good ideas forward without causing burnout. There will be time for questions at the end of Jenny's session, so please add any questions into the chat, which you'll see in the top right corner of your screen. And with that, I will hand over to Jenny to get us started. Thanks, Jenny.
Thank you, Claudia, and welcome everybody. So happy to have you here today. As Claudia already mentioned, I'm Jenny. I've worked in volunteering for 20 years. Most recently, over the last 2 years, I've been running Bloom, which is a consultancy service supporting charities with volunteering. And it's also enabled me to judge in between. So when Rostify asked me to do this launch, this lunch and learn, I thought to myself, what could I share that would actually be useful to people doing this job right now? And I kept coming back to the State of Volunteer Management report, which shows that nearly a third of volunteer managers are experiencing burnout. And when I reflected on my own career and I thought about what made me feel exhausted or frustrated or burnt out, the one thing that I kept going back to was the constant advocacy. It wasn't the volunteers, it wasn't the workload. It was just having the expectation of hearing no all the time. And over time, I stopped kind of hearing no started to feel kind of normal, and I stopped being surprised by hearing it. And I came up with ways to adapt and cope with the constant advocacy. I even started to enjoy it. I started seeing it as a puzzle I needed to complete or something I needed to win. And I stopped hearing no as a personal failure. I started to understand kind of the systemic reasons why hearing no was so common in our profession. So many of us are the only senior voice for volunteering in our organisation, and we're often advocating without a senior champion or without a clear home, and sometimes without much understanding by senior leaders. And I know that's true because every time I would connect with peers or other volunteer professionals, I would feel slightly less alone. They'd be nodding along with me and sharing their own experiences of hearing no. In fact, Claudia shared with me that 92 people signed up for this today, which makes me realise that it must be resonating with you guys too. So hearing no is very real and it's a difficult problem in our profession. And I'm going to share some tools and techniques that I've learned along the way to adapt and cope with this, and I hope you find them useful. So hearing no in volunteer management. I wanted to talk through what we hear, the impact it has on us, and what it usually reflects. So there is a chat box function, and feel free to put any comments if you've heard no in the last 12 months, and what have you heard no about. So for me, it was often no, we don't have any budget, no, we don't have any time, no, that's not a priority, not now, maybe next year. And the impact it has on us, it can feel incredibly lonely. It can feel draining to constantly advocate, and it can feel like the constant need to kind of prove yourself, or you're kind of fighting against the tide, which is hard work. And many of us feel that or hear versions of this kind of on repeat. If you also feel comfortable, you can also put in the comments kind of what hearing no has made you feel and kind of how it's had an impact on you. And we'll go back and we can look through that at the end when we have answers for options for question and answers. So what I've heard over time is that most of these no's aren't actually about volunteering or about us, and they often reflect other things that are going on. So often it's about competing priorities, people being cautious, volunteering sitting kind of awkwardly in the organisation, not really having a proper home, or senior leaders who've never managed volunteers and don't really kind of understand what it is that we're trying to achieve. And I think this is really important to acknowledge, because when you stop hearing no as a judgment on your own work or on you, you can start to respond to it differently and put some distance between the no that you're hearing and yourself. And I think that's really important in helping you to turn the no into yes. And you can start looking at the levers, the outward levers for change, rather than being an internal critic. Sorry, for some reason. Oh, there we go. I also wanted to quickly kind of give you a reality check or a reassurance that turning no into yes doesn't always happen overnight. Changing how volunteering is seen in an organisation is culture change, and that takes time. Building up your confidence is a gradual thing and often achieved through small wins. And real influence comes from being consistent, not just getting it once right. So most of these yeses I've had in my career didn't come from one conversation. They came from consistently and repeating kind of those conversations time and time again, and building up relationships with different people. So I just wanted to reassure you that sometimes it does feel slow, and that doesn't mean that you're failing. That's normal. It actually means that you're probably on the right track. So don't feel disheartened if you feel you're not getting anywhere right away. So over the years, I've come to realize that I kind of consistently rely on 4 levers to turn no into yes. You don't need to pull all of them at once. Sometimes one is enough, sometimes it's a combination. And these 4 levers are relationships, relevance, data, and repetition. And I'm going to go through each one in more detail now. So the first lever is relationships. And for me, this is one that's made the biggest difference. In volunteering, relationships often matter more, in my view, than kind of the structural hierarchy that exists within an organisation. Influence isn't just about the job titles, and often it's about building relationships across the organisation, not just upwards. It's about who trusts you and who will back you when you're not in the room. And your allies don't always sit in the obvious places. They're not just your line manager. They can be in comms, operations, finance, safeguarding, anywhere. So many of you might be familiar with this already. You're managing upwards, managing across, you're translating volunteering every day, and you're working with people who don't always understand volunteering, and that's really hard. So this lever is about being intentional and genuine with the relationships that you build. And one practical thing that you can do is map your stakeholders. So who actually makes the decisions in your organisations and who influences those decisions quietly? And who are your allies? Who gets volunteering? Who's passionate about volunteering? So spending time understanding what matters to them, and also nurturing those relationships over time can really help. So when no comes from someone that you have a relationship with, it's really that end of the conversation. You can see it as the beginning and go from there. The second lever I have is relevance. So this is the one that really changed how often I heard yes. So often there are 3 realities in play. What you want to happen, what volunteers want, and what the organisation wants. And in my view, problems start when we only argue from one of those positions. And usually, in my experience, it's often been my own, kind of like my own judgment, my own thoughts, rather than looking kind of collectively across the organisation about what else is going on. So relevance is about finding the sweet spot where they overlap. It means understanding your organisation's strategy. It means knowing what senior leaders are focused on right now, and staying grounded in the volunteer voice and what they want. So I often ask those 3 questions before I ask anything from an organisation. What strategic priority does it support? What problem does it solve right now? And who benefits if this works? In my view, when you frame volunteering ask through relevance, it's often harder for people to say no. The third lever I have is data, and data matters because experience alone is rarely enough, even when you know you're right. And I've definitely learned this the hard way. I have a vivid memory about 10 years ago. In my career, I was head of volunteering. I'd been in the role a few months. I'd listened, I'd spoken to people, I'd reviewed the service, I'd done a deep dive. And for me, it was really obvious what needed to change. So I took it to my line manager and she said, prove it. And my heart absolutely sank. Genuinely, I was like feeling despair because in my head, I knew what we needed to do and I needed her support to back me up. So in that moment, I realized that she wasn't my advocate and I needed to bring her along with me. And I also realized that I didn't have the evidence to back it up. I didn't have a budget. I had no access to volunteer data as I was working in a federated organisation and everything sat locally. And I had very limited resource. So I used what I did have and I set up a simple registration form on our website for volunteers to register their interest. And in the first year, we had 5,000 people sign up. And a month after they signed up, I emailed them all a simple SurveyMonkey survey asking about their experience. And 2 things kept coming up. Again, the training was too long and the communication was poor. And that data changed the conversation. It wasn't just my opinion anymore. It was evidence, repeated, consistent, and grounded in experience. So that's the point of this lever. You don't need big budgets to get the data that you need. You don't need perfect systems. What you need is to ask consistent questions, have a number of mix of qualitative and quantitative data, so numbers and stories, and evidence that repeats itself. So having that kind of data and that evidence backs up your professional judgment rather than replacing it. So yeah, I'm a big advocate on data to get turn no into yes. Lever 4 is repetition, and this is the final lever that I have, and this one matters because in my view change really happens the first time you ask, or the second time, or even the third time, and repetition is what builds itself. If you've ever walked away from a conversation thinking I've already said this, you probably have, but often it's the first time someone else has really heard it. So one simple thing that you can try is repeating the same message in different formats to different audiences and over time. And that might mean a conversation followed up by a paper, followed up by an update, or raising the same point in different meetings framed slightly differently each time. What repetition creates is familiarity, and familiarity builds credibility and it reduces resistance. And over time, it creates organisational memory. Eventually, volunteering stops sounding new or risky and it just becomes part of how things are done. So repetition isn't about nagging, it's about staying visible, it's steady and consistent. And when you combine it with relationships, relevance and data, no starts to be, it's more difficult for people to say no. And if you've reach the point where you feel like you're a broken record, that's often the moment the message is actually landing. Sorry, bear with me, it's not going to the next slide. Okay, Okay, so this is my favourite slide of the talk. Sometimes when all else fails, you do need to just be brave. It doesn't mean ignoring decisions, but it does mean being honest about what's in your gift. You might not be able to buy the fancy new learning management system with a big price tag on. You might not have the budget for that, but you could use an off-the-shelf system that does most of what you need at a fraction of the cost. So compromising your ask and making a decision to ask for less is often a really good way to pilot things and to test things quietly. So I did this. I implemented an LMS called Teachable, very cost-effective, kind of off-the-shelf system. I piloted it. I piloted it in a certain area. And built up that credibility, built up that data. And you can do that, and you can kind of learn from it, and you can use that learning to kind of build your case for the ultimate kind of thing that you want. Once something exists, once you've got other people kind of testing and trialing it, like, they can start sharing the impact it has on them, the difference it makes to them as staff or volunteers, and it starts becoming kind of harder to say no to. And if internal funding still isn't there, you can look elsewhere. You can look for grants, partnerships, or short-term funding. So I'm very much on the kind of wavelength of seeking forgiveness and not permission, and trying to give it a go within reason, kind of within your gift. So I wanted to end the kind of talk by reframing no slightly, because for me, no isn't no. It's not a full stop. It's kind of just the beginning of what's next. If the answer is no budget, then the question becomes, what other funding routes exist? If it's not a priority ask, what evidence would actually change this conversation? And if it feels like no one's listening, it's worth stepping back and asking, where does influence sit right now? And if you're still hearing no, and that doesn't always mean stop, it sometimes just means to repeat gently and strategically. And none of this removes the challenge of hearing no and how exhausting that is. But I wanted to reassure people here today that you have options, and no isn't always no. It's often just not yet. And I believe that once you start seeing it in that way, it's something you can work with, and not something that stops you in its tracks. Sorry, bear with me. It's not letting me go. Okay. So that's everything I wanted to cover today. I wanted to have some time for question and answers, and for people to kind of share their experience as well, because I really believe that kind of peer-to-peer support in these spaces are important. I hope this session has reminded you or reassured you that you're not alone in hearing no, and to really, you know, reach out to your peers after this session. You know, I'm also available on LinkedIn if you want to DM, if you've got a specific challenge that you wanted to share with me, that you're struggling to overcome. I'm more than happy to have, you know, a quick conversation with you. Yeah, I hope what I've shared is helpful, and yeah, wish you all luck in turning those no's into yeses. And I'd love to hear if you have any successes after today. Do keep me posted. Yeah, I'd love to hear about it. So yeah, we've got time for questions now.
We do. I apologize, the chat function isn't working for attendees for some reason, but you'll see the question box. Everyone, I can see some questions coming through in there, so it's the one with the little question mark. If you've got any comments or questions, to drop them in there. But thank you for that, Jenny. Some really great ideas in there. I like the reframing slide with the follow-up question. That's really really helpful. We've got some questions I'll read out now. What metrics are best or most persuasive when advocating for volunteer program investment?
I think that depends on what it is specifically you want to be like what you want to invest in. So for example, if you're looking, so my experience is often like getting systems, and one way that I've got investment before is gathering that volunteer feedback, because the voice of the volunteers is so powerful. So you can do that through a simple survey, or you could do that through a focus group. And when you start grounding your ask in, this isn't what you want, it's not what the volunteering department wants, it's not even, you know, it's what the volunteers want, it's what they need to be able to deliver their services in an effective way. My experience is that organisations will listen to that, especially if it's not just one voice, if it's a collection of voices, if it's voices in volume, you know, if you've got a lot of people saying the same thing and you can prove that it's kind of a definite need, then that often helps.
Thank you. Another question around piloting and trialing something. As volunteering professionals, we are used to and good at getting by with imperfect systems and making them work. So if we don't hold out for what we really want or need, where we'll be expected to keep making do. Any suggestions on how to get around this, please?
Yeah, that's a difficult one. It's kind of, in my view, it's like a chicken and egg scenario. Like if you don't try and test with what's within your gift. So I just give the teachable example. I really wanted to, you know, a really fancy LMS system in one of the places I was at, and it was just a no. It wasn't going anywhere. There was no budget. And I realized that I could do what I needed to do in a roundabout way with a much cheaper version. And when I implemented that and got the voices of the staff and the volunteers saying how good it was, again, it's that collective voice, it's that collective noise. It's not just you as a lone person saying it. You start having a team around you. And then I would also say that it's who you share that information with. So not just your line manager. Yes, your line manager can be a good advocate. Sometimes they're not always the best advocate. And sometimes it's about seeing who else it would benefit within the organisation, what other department, what other member of staff would implementing something like this benefit. And it's about having the conversations with them as well. So kind of building your internal allies as well at the same time, I think really helps.
Mm-hmm. Another question here, what tips do you have to just keep going when you keep getting no due to concerns about risk?
Oh gosh, yeah, I've heard that one before.
Mm-hmm.
Pause, just take some time out just to think, you know, if you give yourself some time to pause, because our mental health and our well-being is really important. And I think if it's causing you a lot of stress and emotional upset, just pause, because it's not worth you to feel like that to drive something forward. I think in our profession, we're very passionate people. We care a lot about what we do. And therefore, when we see something that seemed obvious to us that would genuinely help more people, it's very frustrating when we keep getting knocked back. But I would just say, just pause, just give yourself time to heal, talk to your peers, get a mentor potentially, somebody else who gets it, that can reassure you, kind of build up that confidence. And then once you've had that time to heal a little bit, I would then, you know, take the opportunity to think, okay, how can I approach this again but not get the same results? And, you know, maybe it is about building allies internally. Maybe it's pausing for 6 months and just focusing on relationship building. My view is, when building relationships often is the biggest advocate for change, like the lever for change is those relationships that you build. So yeah, I would just say give yourself some time and space and pause. Yeah.
This next question might be in a similar vein. Only one department in my workplace has volunteers. All other departments either say they're at capacity, so can't take volunteers on, or have new managers that aren't settled into their roles yet. What can I do to make volunteers seem more appealing rather than extra workload?
That's a real common problem as well. In fact, the last AVM networking event, everyone was saying, we know as volunteer professionals how beneficial volunteers are. It's trying to kind of prove to other teams. It only needs to be something small. So, take a step back. My advice would be to not try and integrate volunteering across all teams, but find that particular team. So I did it in one place with fundraising team who really wanted to engage with volunteers, but they struggled with capacity and capability. So they wanted a bit more hand holding. And it was probably 6 months to a year of working quite closely with that team, and really being kind of that extra pair of hands, the extra knowledge, that guidance and support. And when we got to them a place of confidence, we were able to step back, and they were able to kind of do it on their own. And so investing your time and your resources, one particular kind of team, I think can help, because then when other teams see the success of that team, that fundraising team, then that will kind of speak volumes for you. So I would just say, yeah, don't spread yourself too thinly, and focus on people that have expressed an interest to engage in volunteers, but perhaps don't have the capacity or capability to do so, rather than going across all teams.
Having a look now, we've had a couple of questions in that similar vein. What has been an effective motivator for organisations to take notice of volunteer management needs? So definitely a shared challenge.
I think when it starts to be within the strategy, so I've kind of been in organisations where you've got your organisational strategy, and volunteering is just kind of like a tag on at the end. But then they say that volunteering is really integral to the organisation. So I think if you really want to kind of embed volunteering, it's trying to have those strategic conversations with directors and with the CEO when they're doing the next strategy, and kind of talking about how important it is to have volunteering kind of embedded within that. And once it becomes a strategic priority, it then becomes an organizational priority to kind of deliver on that, rather than being a tag on, is my view. Yeah,
for sure. And our 2025 report you mentioned earlier had some of those findings in there of the benefits of having a volunteering strategy embedded within the organizational strategy. So I'll definitely share that as a follow-up resource.
That was
support some of those conversations being had.
Yeah.
Any tips for promoting improved thinking and valuing volunteer impact within your organisation, making sure they're getting the feedback they deserve across all projects and departments?
So the volunteers are getting the feedback they deserve, is that?
I think it's a similar question to what we had before, making sure volunteer impact is recognised within the organisation. So
yeah, I mean, it depends how your organisation is structured and what the kind of mechanisms of communication are. But if you have I don't know, like a monthly organisational newsletter, making sure that volunteering has a place on that. If you have an intranet, making sure that you're not tucked away, that you've got a visibility within kind of your voice about what you're doing and what your volunteers are doing. So it's just making yourself more visible within your organisational structures, however you communicate. And my experience is that all organisations communicate in very different ways. So just making sure you have that visibility. And even if you don't have a head of volunteering, it's okay to still kind of demand that you have these things for volunteering. Sometimes it's hard. I've been in organisations where you are the only one and you don't have a head of kind of necessarily advocating for you, but you have permission to advocate for yourself and say that you need to be there, in my view.
Absolutely. And last question I think we've got here is, someone said that their volunteers have to be supervised by a member of staff across services who often have very high workloads and feel that supervising a volunteer would add to this. They struggle to see the benefits it could bring. So what would be the best way to encourage them to take some time to invest in a volunteer?
I think it depends on the organisation and the role and what supervision actually means, because one thing I would say is, does the volunteer actually has to be supervised? Like, what does supervision mean? Like, how can you empower a volunteer to do their role without, you know, the need for lots of staff to support them? Yes, you need obviously supervision to make sure a volunteer is kind of okay in their role and they feel supported, but if there's this feeling that they need to be, you know, closely supervised when they don't, I'm not talking about kind of regulated activity, etc. I'm talking about, you know, your office volunteer, you could probably quite happily get on with things without regular supervision, etc. It just needs to be relevant to the role, yeah, I think it's a tricky one, because that's often the case, that volunteers are managed by members of staff that have multiple priorities. So I think it's about developing services and empowering volunteers in ways that you don't always have to rely on that all the time.
Yeah, that makes sense. And just not a question, but a final comment saying, just wanted to say what Jenny has said really resonates with me. It's been really helpful to hear that repetition can get things done and not be tiresome. So thank you for sharing that feedback. I think we'll leave the questions there, but if you move forward a couple of slides, Jenny, I'll just share our upcoming webinars. But yeah, firstly, thank you so much to Jenny and to all of you for joining today's webinar. We hope you found it valuable. It was great to see the questions coming through and the shared challenges to open up these conversations. So yeah, before we go, a couple of new webinars coming up over the next few weeks. So on the 11th of March, we've got a demo-led session, which is designed for sporting organisations but open to all, hosted by my colleagues Anna and Tom. And then on the 18th of March, a nice follow-up session to this one, volunteering consultants Charlotte and Dan will be talking more about wellbeing for volunteer managers. So if you scan that QR code on the screen there, that will take you to our website where you can find out more and sign up. We will share all of those details in a follow-up email, as well as a recording of today's session if you'd like to revisit anything. We'll make sure you've got links to where you can talk to Jenny as well on LinkedIn or her website. So that's all for today. Have a great day, everyone, and thank you to our wonderful host, Jenny, and we hope to see you at another Rostify webinar soon.
Thank you. Thanks so much for inviting me. I've really enjoyed it, and I hope everyone finds it useful.